You might want to transport your bike by car, but you don't want to rely on a roof rack or a rear rack. And there's some reasons why you wouldn't want to do that. They're not as secure and your mileage isn't as good either. So here's some tips on how to fit your bike or bikes into the back of the car with some extra help for small cars, and also how I do it into my van. Obviously, if you've got a long estate car or station wagon, then this is much easier. And it's why in the past when I had cars, I always made sure I bought an estate, just because bikes will go in the back much easier. First thing to do is to lower the rear seats to give you the biggest boot space possible. So the first thing you want to do is carry some sheets or blankets to put down into the back of your car, because this is where you can damage your car, get it muddy, scratch it by dragging your bike over this lip. In the past, in my estate cars, I have had sort of specialist boot liners where they're made to fit the back of the car, and you can get with a flap that comes over, because I do find these will get scuffed on the edge of your boot. They are expensive and they are specific to the car, so if you want to sell the car, it's kind of useless then. So my other tip is to go on Amazon or something like that and buy a load of these. These are what we call like move-in blankets. So house removal firms will have these. They're pretty big and they're dirt cheap, so I bought a 10 pack of these and find them really useful. So what I'll do is lay one of these down first before I put the bike in. I'll also try and hook it somehow over the back of the front seat, because you'll find this is where your wheel will push up against it and can start to get it really mucky. Right, my bike's dirty. I guess this is kind of hard to avoid if you live somewhere like the UK. You'll often be putting a muddy bike into the back of your car. That's why I'm protecting it. You could try and clean your bike first. I've done that in the past, but sometimes you're just gonna then put a really wet bike in the back of your car. So what I tend to do is leave it dirty, stay in my riding kit, because you can get covered in mud doing this as well. And if you've got a car like this, lovely little Ford Fiesta, not very big, you're gonna have to take at least a wheel out to try and get it in. So I've not done this before, but I'll take the front wheel out. That is the easiest way to try first. I'll always stick the front axle back in just so I don't lose it. Some bigger estates, you might be able to fit your bike in without taking the wheels off, but often you'll find road bikes you might be able to, but mountain bikes, the sort of the stack height, you know, the front end height of it is too wide to fit in the car, so you'll probably have to take the front wheel off anyway. So now, my favourite way of doing this is picking the bike up like this, and I will go back wheel in first, drive side down, slightly controversially, but I'll show you why in a second. All right, first problem, the Fiesta is too short. Obviously this isn't gonna fit like this. However, I'll leave it like this for a second because I'll tell you how I would do it with an estate, how I used to do it. So I like to put the bike drive side down. You do need to make sure that the weight of the bike isn't resting on the rear mech. So quite often what I'll do is I'll actually have a kit bag in first that will sit below the chainring, or at least the crank, so it'll prop the bike up a little bit so the rear mech isn't carrying the weight of the bike. But then it feels like it's protected, especially if I'm chucking more stuff in, or particularly another bike. I like to have the rear mech down and know that it's not touching anything, whereas if it's up and you stack heavy stuff onto it or another bike on there, I feel like it's going to get damaged. So I've done it like this forever and it's always been all right, but like I said, I make sure it's packed out. Then I'll put another blanket on top of the bike for security, so people aren't going to see it, in case you maybe need to go in and get food somewhere or whatever. But also, again, it just protects the bike and the car from getting scratched. Right, I'm stuck, so I'm going to have to take the rear wheel out for a small car, but it's kind of simple. I will actually still put the bike in the same way, so rear end diagonally into that corner, bars into this corner. It should fit easily, it's just the extra faff and, you know, muddiness involved with taking the rear wheel out. When it comes to removing the rear wheel, you want to get your chain down to the bottom of the cassette, and then with Shimano rear mechs, you probably want to turn the clutch system off. With a SRAM, you can push the mech cage forward, and then you push a little button there. You see how it locks it, gives you loads of chain slack. Now, a lot of people like to flip their bike over to do this. I'm not a big fan of that, to be honest, because you find that it really does scruff up probably your brake clamps or the collars and your grips, and it makes your bike look super scruffy. So I'd rather do it with the bike right way up. Obviously now you've got to be careful that you don't scratch your fork leg, because it's going to be kind of hard to keep the bike lifted whilst you're doing this. So more often than not, I'll find a soft piece of grass or a blanket like that to rest my fork leg onto, and then I'll start undoing the rear axle. The drop of seat post down is going to give you a bit more space to maneuver as well. There you go, snug fit in the Fiesta, but it works. Now I'll use my second blanket over the bike and then rest the wheels on top, just making sure nothing's going to move. I'm sure this is where bikes get a lot of damage. It's not necessarily riding them, it's kind of moving bikes around or storing them and things rubbing against each other. Luckily it's super easy with my bike to take the wheels out with those through axles that you can undo by hand. So I'll always put them back into the bike. Just don't overdo them tight because it will pull the frame or the fork in. Just hand tight. I've seen it so many times where people rock up for a ride and they've forgotten their axle, so don't do that. Also, I'll keep a multi-tool in my car permanently as part of my sort of traveling workshop because sometimes you'll need a 6mm to take your rear wheel out or whatever, but that stays in the van. You can even, you know, some of these have little straps where you can make a little system. Look at that, it's got a little Velcro piece there, perfect for leaving my multi-tool in the car. So the most vulnerable parts are your rear mech, like I've said already, but also rotors. This is where they can get bent. So if I'm just putting one bike in, I'll probably leave them like this, rotors up, and make sure I don't throw any more kit bags on top of those. However, if you're packing more bikes in, I think my record in my old Nissan Micra was 2 people and 3 bikes. So you're gonna have to take the wheels out of all of those and sort of just make sure that when you're leaning stuff on top of it, the other bike, that these aren't gonna get squashed and bent. Put the heaviest bike at the bottom and get stacking away. It's not ideal, and you're probably gonna need a lot of blankets to do this nicely, but I reckon I could at least fit another bike in there. So I'm an average size human being and I ride a medium bike, so it does make your life quite a lot easier because they're not as long. If you've got an XL bike, you might find that even this doesn't work. And the next thing to do is take the rear mech off. It's not ideal because you're probably gonna have it hanging there with off the rear cable. But again, try and pad it out. It's not too bad. Taking rear mechs on and off all the time, you just gotta be really careful you don't cross thread it as it goes back in. So make sure it's nice and clean, grease it up, and make sure you're nice and careful putting it in nice and square when you're doing it. But that's the next best thing, taking that rear mech off. If you're really tight for space, and I've done this in the past where I've had an estate car, but I need all the seats for the kids and you've got to fit your bike just into the rear boot space, you might have to take the fork off as well. Kind of like the rear mech, it's not great because it can flap around because it's still attached with cables. So that's when you've got to be super careful with blankets, but you can actually fit a bike into a really small space if you take off the rear mech and the fork. Some people swear by using these little disc brake spacers when they travel with their bike, because if your brake is pulled when you haven't got a disc in there, obviously because your wheels are out, and the pads are going to squash together, you can sort of reset them by getting something inside there and pushing it back. It's a bit of faff. You might find that you have to then reset the alignment on your caliper because the pads are kind of moved around. Personally, I don't really use these. I just try and make sure that I don't pull the brakes when there's nothing in there. Even when traveling, when I'm flying with my wheels out, I don't use these things. And very, very rarely have I had to do this. But I know some people like the sort of assurance of having these in the pads so that nothing can go wrong. If, like me, you're so committed to the bike life that you want to take a bike everywhere you go, then a van really is a way forward, and I love having one. I've got a long wheelbase van, so there's plenty of space for people in the front and bikes in the back without having to take the wheels off. But there's still a couple of tips, I reckon, on how to pack a van well. I guess this is going to depend a little bit on the type of van and shape you've got, but I always tuck the bikes in front wheel first. So actually, kind of the weight of everything is the front tyre pushing into the wall and the bar into that wall there as well. It's kind of scruffy anyway, so I'm not too worried. I then use one of these good little ratchet straps for tightening around from sort of diagonally from the back wheel up and across the stem, and then tighten it down. I often get an old rag, put that there just so that ratchet strap isn't gonna rub on my bar. And then you don't need crazy pressure. I have heard of people using these big industrial ones of these and actually pulling the side of the van in, which seems crazy. You don't need much pressure at all, and that holds the bike super secure. Then for more bikes, I'll stick again either a blanket. Basically, you need to protect the side of the bike at the back and the fork. They're the parts that will touch each other and get scratched. Or Actually, some people, like Nukeproof, come out with this, which is amazing. If you're doing this a lot with multiple bikes, this will go around the bike and fully protect it. Now I'm going to be controversial yet again with how I pack bikes into vans, because not everyone does this, but I always go the same end to end. So a lot of people will sort of alternate. They'll stick the next bike in backwards and then the next one in forwards. But I find the bikes really bang together if you do it that way, and you can't fit as many. So what I'll do is go the same way and then tuck the front wheel around sort of the front wheel of the other one, and they'll kind of spoon against each other. The other bonus of having a van, and like me if you ride a lot, is just carrying your stuff permanently with you. So I've got a full toolkit, spares, all my riding kit, a track pump, helmet stashed up here, all my wet weather kit, coffee maker, camelback, everything I need to go mountain biking pretty much in any weather. My final tip is to try and make sure people can't see your bike in your car or in your van. So covering them with blankets, or I've got curtains on the back windows, just to try and not advertise that you've got bikes. Again, that's one of the downsides I definitely think of having bike racks, because I've heard of people being followed home from bike parks and then their bike's being stolen that night. I also don't try to have stickers on the side of my cars or vehicles, so hopefully it's kind of incognito. There you go, there's a few tips on how to pack your bike without damaging your bike or your car. And give us a thumbs up if you love having a van.